Hi everyone. Many of you on the line have already met, and most of you already familiar with the prioritization exercise that we're going to present. It's a prioritization tool that was just finalized, but it's not brand new. It comes from the best practices from DRC, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So I hope that it's not entirely new to everyone. But in case it is, here's the introduction. So when we start out for the HNO, usually we just go and ask our partners to collect as much information as possible in order to jumpstart the analysis of secondary and primary data. But what happens afterwards is that we usually have a lot of information and it's quite difficult to organize it. So the prioritization tool is designed to help condense large amounts of humanitarian information into a format that will assist the comparison between the sectors and between geographic areas in a country, and it will come up with a ranking, and it will be the support for a discussion at the intercluster, for instance. What the prioritization tool also does is that it structures transparent paths toward establishing priorities. This is because we want to make the process not only the most transparent as possible, but also to improve the accountability and be able to retrace the steps that we took in order to come up with the priorities that we define for a country. Thirdly, the prioritization tool facilitates the discussion to reach common understanding of the humanitarian situation in countries where the situation is not always that clear about what would be the priorities, and the different sectors may argue about the situation. Finally, we hope that it can greatly reduce introduction of bias into decision making. So this is basically what we hope the prioritization tool will help you to do in your country. So how does it work? First, don't be too scared. It's a little new, but it's quite easy. Excel-based tool. It comprises a list of themes such as food, conflict, shelter, and so on. And to each of the sectors and clusters, there are indicators that are associated. And to each of the indicators, there are weights that are applied based on the relative importance of each indicator. Then a cumulative score is generated, and this is typically done by adding the weighted values of each sectors or themes. And this is usually done geographically, so it allows for comparison across the geographic location in your country. So let me be a bit more clear, just in case the different steps were not clear enough. The results that you get from this exercise, from the scoring by each sector, are then normalized to improve the comparability, and then it helps with the sector's number of indicators that can be chosen. The point that is very important is that we designed the tool to be flexible, and we offer a set of indicators as a reference if the sectors or cluster in your own country don't already have a set of indicators. But of course, they can be adapted by each of a cluster with regard to what is available in your country and also what is the most relevant in terms of indicators to follow. The end product of this prioritization tool is a heat map that will highlight the geographic and sectorial accumulated needs. So we'll go into a bit more detail at the end of this. So during the presentation, we'll take you through the 7 steps of the prioritization process, and it will be as follows. First step of the prioritization is to present the concept of the intercluster and agree on the parameters. So some of the countries that were online during the WebEx yesterday are already doing this today, and so I wish good luck to our colleagues in DRC who are presenting the tool at the intercluster today. Step number 2 is for each of the cluster sectors and OCHA office to identify 2 to 5 indicators and their weights to have a set of indicators that will best illustrate the humanitarian situation in your country. Once that those indicators have been identified, the cluster lead should send them to OCHA, who will, in step 3, format the prioritization tool. Once the prioritization tool has been formatted to fit your country's needs, the OCHA office will send out the tool, mostly data entry worksheets that I will present a bit later on. And it will be step 4, the cluster lead sectors will be responsible for filling out the information on the indicators that they chose themselves. In step number 5, they will send back those worksheets to the OCHA IMO, who will compile the data into the prioritization tool. And from these data, the OCHA office will produce heat maps. Those heat maps will help to have a visual product that will be a good support to organize the HNO workshop, to present the findings of the exercise, and to formulate the priorities based on the prioritization tool, and of course, the analysis that has been derived from it. Now, to get into a bit more detail about each of the steps, step number 1 is the presentation and the endorsement by the humanitarian community in your country. This should be done typically by sharing the HNO guidance with the concept note and to discuss it at the intercluster, and also to agree on the time frame and the sequence for the exercise. So step 1, at the intercluster meeting, you will need to agree on the time frame and the sequence. In terms of time frame, we know that you're already under tight deadlines. So the soonest you start the process, the better it's going to be, so that the HNO can be completed, finalized for the 30th of September. The sequence should be aligned in terms of coordinated assessments, if you still need to have some, or with the elaboration of the HNO. Now, you will also need to discuss with the intercluster about the geographic level of analysis, and by this we mean that you need to discuss what would be the smallest unit for data collection. Finally, you would need to revise what is already available for each of the cluster and sectors. Most of the countries where you are already have a set of indicators, already have CAPs and CAP indicators, systems for monitoring, etc. So review what you already have, what can be used in this prioritization tool. Now, once you've agreed on the first parameters, you will need to work with the cluster lead if necessary, and if this doesn't already exist, to define a set of country-specific indicators. There are two sets of indicators. The first one would be the intercluster or thematic indicators. This could be, for instance, a set of indicators on access, a set of indicators on humanitarian capacity. It could be on conflict. It could be on the number of IDPs or refugees, depending on which agency is in charge of this. Now, in terms of cluster or sectors, we've, like I mentioned, provided you with indicator tables from what was done in DRC and in Pakistan, but it's only for reference purposes. As I said, this is the table that was used in DRC a few years back, and it gives you an idea of what we mean by a set of indicators per cluster or sector. So you have health, then you have the weights that are linked to each of the indicators that the health cluster has to choose. Now, in each of the countries that you're working in, you have a vastly different situation in terms of data availability. So, in case you're in a data-rich context, you're very lucky, and the cluster should identify quantitative indicators. For instance, the exact number of schools that were used to shelter IDPs. Now, if you're in a context where the information is not that easily collected or that easily available, the clusters can use the ranges. And in the worst case scenario, if the context is data poor, the cluster can use incrementing graduation, and this is heavily based on expert judgment. So, depending on what your situation is, you can formulate or help the cluster formulate indicators so that you will still have a good understanding of what the situation is per cluster or sector. Of course, the less smart the indicators are, the less nuanced heat map you will get at the end. Right. Step number 3, when all the clusters have choose a few indicators that illustrate the best the situation for your country, they will need to send those indicators and their weights to the OCHA IMOs, so that the OCHA IMOs can format the tool that we will use afterwards. There are 3 then areas that the IMO will need to consider to format and adapt the tool. It's number 1, the common operating databases, data sets, mostly geographic and demographic. Secondly, they will incorporate the indicators for each of the clusters. And finally, they will need to lock the worksheets to protect the data entry sheets that we're going to share with the clusters, so that the structure of the tool is not altered. But don't worry, even for this, I think we can get the buy-in from the clusters, because they have a lot of saying beforehand, because they're the ones who choose the indicators that they will report on. Now, the general structure of the tool, in the package that you receive, you have first, I think, a read me first kind of Word document that is just a little recap on how the tool works. Then you have several Excel worksheets. What I'm going to explain now is how this is structured. The 0-0 compilation worksheet is what we could call the master document, the master worksheet that is seeding from all the sector slash cluster slash thematic worksheets. So for instance, this is a print screen of the compilation worksheet. And you can see that here in green, you have the access information. Here you have the indicator that describes the situation in terms of access. And then below you have the 1 or 0, which stands for yes or no, which is the assessment by the OCHA office, in that case, of the situation of access in each of the geographic locations that are on the left side of the tool. In the first line here, the 1 means that the OCHA office deems that in that area of Kahemba, the situation that could best be described as full access. Right. This information comes from another worksheet that is the sector of thematic worksheet access example access recap. So each of the sectors or thematics that are in this compilation worksheet, like we have here, green access, pink IDP, orange for return, and brighter orange for protection. All the data that is below is feeding from the specific related worksheets. You can also see in this screen that you have different tabs in the master document. You have the prioritization tool. Then you have 2 yellow tabs that are the heat maps. And then in green tabs here, you have the reference tables of indicators for the RCS access. I'm not going to get into too much detail. This is mostly for the OCHA IMOs, and it's a description of where the data feeds from in each of the sectorial slash cluster data sets. Right. So this is just a few more words on the other tabs in the compilation worksheet. We have the heat map. The heat maps are actually pivot tables that are inserted to produce a visual, and it structures the representation of the data from the prioritization tool tab. So the range of the pivot table is exactly the same as the prioritization tool tab. So if the indicators are modified or you add some of the indicators, the IMOs will need to refresh the data source to make it cover all the information that you need if you want it to be aggregated in the pivot table. Now, the second component of the tool is, the cluster sector worksheet. There should be as many cluster sector worksheets as there are themes and clusters that need to be represented. In the package that we sent, there are only 3 cluster sector worksheets. If they're just there as a reference purposes, it's the access, IDP, and protection worksheets. So I'm usually using either the access or the protection worksheets as examples. In the worksheets, the information is organized as follows. First, here you have a little information box that reminds by whom the information is supposed to be entered. Now, here you're on the protection recap tab, as I can show you on the screen. And it says that it's a recap from the province sheet, and that the information that is on the recap has to be vetted by the national cluster or sector lead. What this means is that this is basically the master document for the protection cluster lead. All the information in this recap tab comes from the alternating blue and green tab at the bottom. These are the level 1 administrative level boundaries. Talking about administrative boundaries, on the left side, there are 3 columns that list all the administrative levels that will be considered for an assessment and then analysis. All the information here is pulled from the worksheet that I call the metadata. I was told by our IMOs here that we should actually call it the COD. So just so that you know if there's a discrepancy in the guidance. All the worksheets take their information from the same data set, so that there should be no discrepancies when we aggregate afterwards. Afterwards, here you have the 1, 2, 3, 4 indicators that the protection cluster choose to describe the incremental severity of the protection situation in country. You can notice that the last column is white and it's entitled No Data. We added this column because we wanted to make sure that you could differentiate a situation where there is no protection issue and a situation where you don't have data on the protection situation. So if you enter the 1 in the no data column, it will then not be taken into consideration when you aggregate the data. The score will be normalized, and the scoring for this area will reflect the fact that there's no information available. It will not be aggregated as a 0. The next columns are the scoring and the normalization scored of each of the geographic areas in the table. I'll come back a bit later on what we mean by normalization. Then you have 2 columns here that are the estimated overall magnitude of the issue that has been assessed in each of the geographic areas, and it's compared against the total population, and this information comes from the COD. Finally, you have the ranking. So the ranking is based on the normalized score for each of the geographic levels. Finally, you have a few more things here on the side. You have a little recap that shows the dispersion that you have by indicators for your country. So for the best situation here in this example, best indicator, you have 64 admin level 3 areas out of 158 that are best described as fitting into the best case scenario. Then you also have 63 admin level 3s that fit within the second best indicators, 15 within the third, and 16 that are considered to be the worst case scenario in terms of protection. You also have 3 areas for which there was no data. So this is designed to help the cluster lead for protection, for instance, to have a better like a snapshot at what is the general situation in terms of protection in your country. The last few lines here, you have an average of what is the score in terms of protection. In the example here, it's a score of 1.7 out of the maximum score of 4, and this corresponds to a normalized score of 43%. So that is usually quite helpful in terms of analysis. Then you have the list of sources, and there's another box that you can't see because it's just one print screen. Another box that asks the cluster lead to list the implementing partners in each of the administrative level 1, so that this is also a good reference in case we need to verify the information in terms of 3Ws. Lastly, the bottom of your screen, you will see that I designed the worksheet to open on the README First tab. The README First tab is a very short instruction for the end users, who are the national cluster leads or sector leads, so that they have like a very brief, very short instruction on how they can fill the data in the worksheet. Then they have the recap for all of the administrative level for the sector. Then there is an overview where they have pivot tables. I'll show it to you right afterwards. And then you have a tab for each admin level 1 in the country. Right. Now, this was just an example for protection. Of course, if you are going to ask the cluster leads to adapt or choose new indicators or use the ones that they already have, OCHA IMOs will need to adapt each of the sector cluster worksheets. I've consulted with Teshi, who's our IMO here in Geneva, and he told me that this shouldn't take more than a couple of hours just to incorporate the new information. Don't omit to adjust the formulas that once you have added the indicators, and don't forget to update the links to the master document, which is the compilation worksheet, to ensure that there's the automatic feed and the update is cascading properly. Now, when the IMO is updating the worksheet, that's where you have to be careful a little, and I'll explain what we mean by weights and by normalization. In this example, we are presenting the access situation, and so the OCHA office would be in charge of filling the information for this worksheet. So there, the OCHA office has deemed that a scale of 4 incremental levels could be describing the access in the country. So the 4 levels would be the full access, and this would have a weight of 0 in terms of severity. A limited access that is conditioned by seasonal elements, like a rainy season, for instance, would correspond to a weight of 5. And then a limited access for security reasons would be a bit worse in terms of severity, and that would correspond to a weight of 10. Now, the final worst case scenario in terms of access severity would be no access at all, and this would be a weight of 15. So here in the first line, in the Celia admin level 3, the OCHELF is deemed that the situation could be best described as full access. So they put a 1 here on the line for full access. The 1 is weighted by a 0 because access is perfect, of course. 1 by 0 gives you a score of 0. Now, in the second line here, the access could be best described as limited because of seasonal reasons. The weight for this is 5, so 1 times 5 is a 5 in terms of score. Now, 5 out of a maximum score of 15 correspond to the 33% of completion on this indicator. Let me reformulate this. A 5 of score out of a maximum score for this indicator is what we consider to be a normalized score. It means that out of the maximum severity, it's corresponding to 5 over 15, which is 33%. If you have more questions about this, we can, of course, answer some of your questions afterwards. Just to give you one last example, on the 5th line in Popo Kabaka, the situation can be best described as limited access for security reasons. The weight for this indicator is 10, so the score is 10, and 10 out of 15 corresponds to a normalized score of 67% of severity. Right. So, in terms of formatting, the IMOs will probably already have, hopefully, the CODs. If they don't, they should get in touch with ISS for support. If you plan on mapping the results, don't forget that you will need to add a P code. Think about it beforehand. It will make things easier for you. And finally, if the last census, demographic census, is older than 5 years, or if you have huge population displacement or significant demographic changes, please specify it because it will create a bias in the scale and scope of the analysis, because your the numerator and numerator will be different. Right. Once the IMOs have formatted the tool, it's ready to be shared with the cluster leads. But please, before you do it, check that all the formulas work, that the data is cascading properly. Do those stress tests with the team in the office before you send it out, so that there's no bug in it. Once the cluster leads have gone through the process of entering the data into the worksheets, they will send them back to OCHA, and the IMOs will then need to check the data to make sure that it's entered in a numbers format. They will relink all the cluster and sector worksheets with the compilation master data worksheet. They will check that all the data range is covered for the formulas, the type of tables, etc., and refresh and update the worksheet. Now, once this is done, this is to give you a little snapshot of what the visual output is. It's automatically generated. Of course, you can change the presentation if you don't like it, but for now it's organized by indicators. The color coding is exactly the same as the one in the worksheet. It's just to make it a bit easier for the IMO to have a lot of lines and a lot of cells to look at, but you can change it, of course. Now, the example here is for DRC, but it's fake data, of course. But from the visual output, what you can see is where the hotspots are. So if this is a heat map, it means that the worst situation is showing in red and the best situation is showing in green. The numbers that are used for this heat map are the normalized score. So for instance, the first few observations that we can say from looking at this heat map is that you have some issues here in protection and in terms of return in several of the administrative level 2s of Jugu, Irumu, and Mahagi in DRC. You can see that there are also some nutrition issues in an otherwise not too problematic province of DRC. So this is quite helpful because it helps you to see if you have an accumulation of issues which should be a good hint for prioritization. Now, I said it's a good hint because afterwards you still need to proceed to a good analysis to understand where flare-ups come from or what the causes are and if your data is reflecting something that you expected or not. Also another visual output, this is what the protection cluster would see in their yellow overview tab that I described a bit earlier. This is their own dashboard. I'm told I'm not supposed to use that word, but it's a dashboard for the cluster lead to have a good understanding of what are the priorities for his own sector, and then the disaggregation per incrementing levels of severity within his own sector. So you have a good understanding here of how many areas are of concern and how many are less of a priority. Now, once you've seen this, you will need to go through the analysis. We've had the data discussion. We've just seen the visual representation, which is the heat map. And I've just gone through the first very obvious observation that you can derive from the visual representation of product. Now, the analysis will help you with the hypothesis. Let me explain. At the beginning, we started to collect as much information as possible. This is basically what the big stack of messy Lego is at the top, it's the data. Then we asked the clusters to organize this data into sorted indicators. And then we arranged it into the worksheets. And after this, we presented it visually into the heat map. So now the question that we need to ask ourselves are the following. Like, of course, it's a metaphor, but you would still need to ask yourself, is your assemblage relevant? is the data relevant compared to the situation that you expected? Then the first obvious primary findings, the observation, which here would be there are as many reds and yellows Legos in this bag, and there are more of those than any other colors. You have also quite a lot of blue and white, but you don't have that many black, green, orange, and lime. So now this is the description, and what we want is to take it further and proceed to an analysis. And the analysis would be the equivalent for this metaphor of asking, how come there is this situation? Is it because the color is cheaper, is yellow or is red cheaper for Lego? Or is it because it's easier to produce? Or is it because the customers have a voice that they like the yellow and the red better? And then Lego just acted on it or not? So now, for instance, if you apply this, framework of analysis to humanitarian sector, an example that I could give you is you have a flare-up in health, and you have an indicator that is, let's say, mortality of children under 5 years old. That is definitely in the red. Now, that's your observation. You know there is a crisis, but you don't know why. You don't know what's the root for it. It could come of a nutritional crisis, and children under 5 are the prime target for nutritional crisis. It could be because they live in an area that's very cold and they have contracted a severe respiratory infection, and then that could probably be a shelter or NFI issue that we need to deal with. It could also be a wash problem. Maybe these children are affected by waterborne diseases. So what I'm saying is that you have a health flare-up, but if you don't go through a multi-sectoral analysis, you might miss the root of your crisis, and this would be quite problematic when you need to formulate your strategic objectives and to formulate the priorities. Right. However, data isn't everything, and this is not a scientifically proof tool. It's just a tool that is going to offer a way to organize the information and scale the sectoral severity. It's going to help you to identify the flare-ups and to compare them across the country. But what it doesn't do is describe the needs, like I explained with the mortality of children in the 5 example. And it doesn't prescribe what the actions that should be carried out should be. So this is pretty much the end of the presentation of the prioritization tool. The last few things that I wanted to say are that it's not a mandatory tool. If you already have one that works, please use it. This was basically designed for the countries that we're starting in the prioritization process, and it's to give you a tool just to start with. If you already have something that works, you are free to use it.